think it's time for us to join. We're not really sure because we have the headphones like plugged in and not on either
I think
of
you
us.
added
So
something
we,
to the
yeah,
opening.
we added something. Yeah, we added a little heartbeat kind of thing at the beginning. We're like, oh, that could sound cool. I don't know. We'll see if it annoys people or if they love it. Okay, so welcome back, everyone, to our third episode. And we actually did come up with a name for our
Yeah.
podcast because we were just like, well, we should probably have like a name or something, not just, two nerds in a podcast, which was a terrible name.
Did you mention that name last week?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we did. But we are now calling the podcast Tell Me the Crime.
Tell me the crime, bro.
Exactly.
Oh, without bro.
Without bro, but we will say bro quite a bit. So, okay.
Tell me the crime.
Exactly. So tell me the crime. That's what you're supposed to say now because I'm about to tell you the crime.
Okay, tell me the crime.
Tell me the crime. All right. So today's episode 3, is called the Cardiff 3, and it's a really famous case from the UK. So
Okay.
if you've never heard of it, it's probably because you're North American and we're all self-absorbed and don't know anything else.
Wait, hold on. What's the title again? The Cardiff?
The Cardiff 3.
Okay, the Cardiff
Yeah.
3.
The Cardiff 3, and it's based on the 3 people who were wrongfully convicted. So
No.
yeah, exactly, right? So let's start with giving you sort of an overview
Okay.
of the opening here, okay?
Sure. I am ready.
50 stab wounds, okay? Valentine's Day, 1988. 20-year-old woman. Yep.
1988.
1988. So it's a little bit old, but 50 stab wounds is what this victim had. Okay, that's a lot of stab wounds, right? So it's a 20-year-old woman. She was found brutally murdered in a flat or an apartment, as us North Americans and I guess Indonesians call it.
A flat? Now I'll call it apartment.
Yeah, I call it apartment. That's
yeah,
what I
apartment,
said.
yeah.
Exactly. Anyway, but I kind of like the word flat. It's nice. So 20-year-old woman, she was found brutally murdered, and like I said, 50 stab wounds. And she was living in this apartment above a betting shop in Cardiff, Wales. Okay. I see you looking confused because you're probably wondering what a betting shop is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I wondered
betting shop, like bed sheet, all
No,
that?
no, like TT.
Oh,
like
pet.
BETTING.
Okay,
like
what's
you're
that?
like you're placing a bet
Yeah,
on something.
yeah.
So I was like, is it a casino or some sort of gambling room? And it turns out it kind of like a gambling room. It's I guess people have TVs and you place bets on like horse races and things like that. And
Is that a
apparently it's still a
British thing?
Yeah, apparently it's still a thing today, and it's pretty popular, and it especially was popular back in the 80s. So
Okay.
she lived above one of these shops, right? So probably a pretty high traffic area. The police, following this murder, they arrest local men, 3 of them. Actually 5 of them, but only 3 of them ended up being convicted, and they were sentenced to life in prison. Then 15 years later, DNA proves that the killer acted alone, and it wasn't any of those 3 whatsoever, right? So that just gives you a little bit of context, sort of an overview of the case.
Okay.
And this is the murder of Lynette White and the confession that nearly buried the truth. So, part 1, let's start with the setting here. Okay, so like I said, this happened in Cardiff, in an area called Butte Town, and it's historically known as Tiger Bay. Okay. Now, and I think it was named Tiger Bay because of something to do with the area that they're living in and how diverse the area was, and how people were pretty prejudiced back then too. And certain populations, especially diverse populations, were more seen as lower class and dangerous, right? So it It was more of a stereotype than anything. It wasn't actually more violent or crime-ridden. Anyway, by the 1980s, the area was economically deprived and still carried the Docklands reputation. And the reputation does actually matter here for when the pressure builds during this case. So, who was Lynette, right? Who was Lynette White? She was 20 years old. She had a young daughter. And
20 years old?
20 years old, I know.
Wait, okay.
Yeah,
20 years old and...
And she had a young daughter.
She has a young daughter.
Yeah,
How old?
I don't know how old the daughter was, but she was young enough. She was probably, 3 or 4 or something like that. But, you got to remember, too, this is back in the 80s. And, people now kind of stay single until, like, their 40s. It's not uncommon, at least in bigger cities.
There's no age limit for now. Like, people can make their own choices for what they want to do in life.
Oh, exactly, right? I mean, we didn't meet until I was 42 and you're 35, which is, very recent. Anyway. Oh, yikes. Okay. Oh, yikes. I'm going to have to cut that out. Or maybe not. Whatever. People like real, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, she did have an involvement with sex work. So, she did do sex work. Okay, so she was 20. She's caring for a young daughter. She was probably trying to make the bills. She was involved in sex work. And it actually wasn't illegal in the UK at this time. It was illegal to solicit, but it wasn't to be a sex worker. Okay, so she had a boyfriend, and this boyfriend's name was Stephen Miller.
Okay. And
this is important because this same Stephen Miller is one of the 3 who was actually convicted.
Oh, no.
Right, in the end. So, and evidence later suggests that Lynette may have been financially supporting Stephen, including helping him fund his drug use. So Stephen was a simple man. And we'll get into him a little bit more later. And I'm not implying that if you use drugs, you're a simple person. That's not what I was saying. He just had a lot of issues.
I was wondering how old
Stephen was?
Yeah.
I don't know his age, but I would assume that he was probably around the same age as Lynette. So when she was killed, police didn't just see a victim. They saw a network of relationships, right, including Stephen, their friends, and things like that. So how did the police actually find her? Now, this is pretty critical. They didn't respond to any screams. There were no neighbors reporting violence, and Lynette had been loaned keys to the James Street flat by a woman named Leanne Vilday. Now Lynette failed to return the keys and couldn't be reached, right? So Vilday became a little bit concerned. She wants her keys back. So she contacted a taxi driver that she knew, and together they approached the police.
Wait, so who approached the police? The woman?
Yeah, the woman who lent the keys to Lynette. Yeah.
And Lynette.
Lynette's the one that got the keys, right? She's the victim that was found murdered in her flat, and Leanne Vilday is the one that lent her the keys to her flat. So police now were also looking for Lynette for a completely unrelated reason. She was wanted, and there was a warrant out for her arrest already because she had missed some sort of, court matter for being a witness for something else completely unrelated. So officers went with Vilday to the flat, and there was no answer. Right, so they forced entry at around 9:17 p.m. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1988, and that's when they found her body. So, now the attack, like I said in the beginning, there were 50 stab wounds, right? The attack was pretty extreme, and the dozens of stab wounds, the severe throat injury, the signs of sexual assault. Were all pretty evidence of an extreme and violent, sort of aggressive attack, right? And there was biological evidence, semen also, that was recovered. And now that detail is going to be a really important element later in this story.
Maybe it has something to do with her sexual work?
It could, right? And that's a good theory, right? And we'll see if that actually is the case or not. So the early leads, early witnesses described that a distressed white male near the area around the time of the murder, disheveled, possibly injured. People said that he might have had a cut on his hand. So police created sort of a composite and pursued that lead, right? They, created one of those sketches, and at least one similar-looking man was detained initially, but he was quickly released after he had a pretty good alibi. So the investigation initially cast a wider net, but quickly that became pretty focused, and it became focused on those three, right? But let's talk a little bit first about sort of the theory that formed, right? Why they went after three people to begin with.
Yeah.
And like I said, one of the reasons they thought it might have been multiple people is that it was so brutal and there were so many stab wounds that they thought for sure it must have been a group of people attacking this person, right? Because who the hell gets stabbed 50 times? Unless you know, I mean, you hear of cases unless someone is, in a fit of rage and attacking someone, or if it's, multiple people and they're just going at it. But that's what they initially thought, right? So forensics later did not support this, but that's initially what they thought. And so they initially arrested 5 local men, and 3 of them were eventually convicted. 2 of them were let go. Now, the 3 were Stephen Miller, Yusuf Abulai, and Tony Paris. Now, Stephen Miller, as I mentioned before, was Lynette's boyfriend.
Yeah.
Right? The one that was
that's
financially reliant on her.
And using drugs.
And, he was also sort of described as a little bit slow and a little bit, he was a little bit slow. He had some issues cognitively. Okay, so let's talk about this part of the case is really fascinating, right? So one of the biggest reasons that the 3 of them went to jail is that there was a confession involved with one of the 3 of them. And that one person was Stephen Miller.
Why?
Right? Yeah.
What did he say?
Well, what did he say? So that's a great question. But let's just talk about the setting in terms of, where he was
I want to know his alibi.
Exactly. Like, why is he... Well, here's the thing, is he initially denied everything, right? But he was interrogated repeatedly over several days. So, and at the beginning, because he didn't do it, he initially denied involvement, and apparently he denied involvement hundreds of times, okay? But eventually he confessed. And in his final statement, he claimed that he was present at the flat, that he participated in the attack, that Yusuf and Tony were also there. Yeah, exactly. The assault escalated to multiple men were involved, and that, and because of this statement and because of this confession, that really became the only evidence that the police had, right? That became the backbone of their entire prosecution case. But problems emerged because his account did change across interviews. Now, they must have had a pretty good legal team at the beginning because that didn't seem to matter for the end for them, because they ended up going to prison. But details appeared throughout these interviews while police were questioning them. Police are questioning Stephen in particular. And some aspects did not align with the forensic evidence. He was later described, and like I mentioned before, he was a little bit cognitively impaired. He was a little bit slow. He was described as vulnerable and highly suggestible too, right? So there are some people that are just more vulnerable to suggestibility, right? And, you think of something like hypnotism. The people that are more likely to get hypnotized are the ones that tend to be more suggestible, right? Okay. So despite the biological evidence not matching any of the three men, the confession was massive and it carried enormous weight, right? It basically carried the entire case.
Yeah, but I still don't get it. Why he made a confession as if he did not
well,
do that?
Well, that's exactly it, right? And we're gonna get into that. We're gonna talk about why would someone confess, and we'll talk about a couple of the psychological issues too. You know, and one of the big reasons though is that he was in there for days and days and hours and hours and hours, and police have these techniques that they use that can suggest to the victim or can suggest to the person that you know, they might have actually done it, or they pushed them to the point where they just get so tired that they just give in because they want it to end. Got into the limit
and they just gave up.
Yeah, and we'll talk about a little bit more of that. But in 1990, all three of those individuals, because of this confession, were sentenced to life in prison. Okay.
Wow.
Long time, right? And these are all innocent people. So let's talk about it. Why confess, right? So what happened in the actual interrogation room matters because people hear, you know, he confessed and they assume that's the end, right? The end of the story right there. But confession doesn't automatically mean truth. And there are three broad categories of false confession that psychologists often talk about, right? So the first is voluntary. Someone confesses without pressure, sometimes for attention or psychological reasons. Right. And that's, you know, that happens once in a while. It's not, you know, not common that people voluntarily, you know, confess to a crime that they didn't do.
They don't do the crime.
But it happens, right? It does happen once in a while. That's not what happened here, though. The second reason is coerced compliant confession, right? And that's when someone confesses to escape stress, end questioning, or avoid perceived consequences, or because the situation becomes psychologically unbearable, right? Think about the room that the person's in. It's probably uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They're staying awake for hours and hours and days on end, and you know they're not exactly in a very comfortable environment, and so a lot of people might try to escape. They'll say, okay, I just want to get out of here, right? They just can't handle this stress anymore. So that's coerced compliant. And then the third is coerced internalized. Now, this is the most disturbing one, right? Because that's when a vulnerable suspect begins to doubt their own memory. And they partially believe the narrative being suggested, right? Which is scary, right? Like to think that you didn't do something, but you can remember that you did all of a sudden.
I mean, even if it's not in a crime scene, like in day-to-day life, when people say something about us, let's say, we will start to believe what we hear frequently.
Yep.
Right? So, I don't know, maybe that's the case.
Exactly. And that's the way that things work in terms of associations and neural networks in the brain, right? So you have these connections that keep getting activated over and over and over. And the more times those are activated, the more times they pair with other events and other truths about yourself, and you start to mix up the truths from the false memories, and it becomes ingrained. Yep.
Yeah.
So you start to believe it, and you start to lose the source of that memory, right? You'll know that memory's there. But you won't be able to sometimes dissociate between what's real and what's not because of how strong that memory has become. So, so that's a really disturbing one, but it's very real. So when a vulnerable person vulnerable suspect begins to doubt their own memory and partially believe the narrative being suggested, that's coerced internalized. So, just the definition again. Now, like we mentioned, Stephen Miller was described as vulnerable and highly suggestible.
Yeah.
And he was interrogated multiple times over multiple sessions, and he denied it several times before he actually confessed. Now, when you look at how modern interrogation psychology works, you can see how this can unfold, right? So interrogation often follows a structured model. First, you isolate the subject or the suspect, right? Second, you assert certainty of guilt, right? You'll say, we know you did it. You absolutely did. And they keep saying that. They speak as if, he's done it, right? It's a matter of fact rather than, oh, you're suspected of this or that. It's, we know you did this. So, and it goes back to those suggestibility memories, right? So third, you minimize the moral severity of the act. So statements like, we know you were there. This isn't the worst thing anyone's done. Other people were involved. You don't want to be the only one taking the blame. So they try to downplay some of the things so that they'll feel more comfortable opening up. Make it sort of a lesser, evil in a sense. So over hours and sometimes days, this creates pressure. Add sleep deprivation, add confusion, add authority, and the suspect's desire to end the situation. A confession can become the path of least resistance, right? We talked about that. Now, exactly,
but,
right?
I mean, long term, it will not, because
it will not. But how many people do you know, though, that would choose a fast, short-term outcome over something that you have to wait for, right?
Yeah.
It's a classic, kid with the marshmallow in front of them, right?
That's
the experiment where you put it in front of them, you say, well, if you wait for 2 minutes, we'll give you 2 marshmallows. But a lot of kids and a lot of adults act the same way, right? They're more likely to spend money right away rather than wait and double it, over 2 years.
Yeah, it's
something
understandable.
Like that. Yeah.
But again, considering the long-term consequence,
Oh yeah, I know, but
and all
you're
the
not,
blame later on.
Right, but when you're messing with people psychologically, they haven't
Well,
slept.
yeah, you're right. That's true.
It's basically a form of abuse, right?
Yeah.
You're ensuring that they can't make consensual decisions, right? And so that's the problem. So, it's always it's often the case too that in these situations, investigators already have a theory. And in this case, they thought that there were multiple attackers. So the questioning unconsciously sometimes steers the suspect toward details that fit that theory. So if a suspect guesses wrong, they're corrected. If they guess right, they're reinforced for their theory, right? So, if they're just saying something, in other words, right, to appease the interrogator, right? Like just say something. The interrogator, if he gets it right or in line with his theory, he'll say, well, yeah, okay, that's great. Now tell us more about that. That just reinforces that that's something that happened and the other thing didn't happen, right? So over time, the narrative becomes more detailed, and those details may not originate from the suspect. They might be from the interrogation, but that's where things get messy, right? And once a confession actually exists, then you have confirmation bias taking over, right? You're trying to, you're looking at everything and paying attention to the details that confirm your theory, and you're ignoring or just not paying attention to the other details that don't confirm your theory. All right, so you have this huge confirmation bias. So forensic inconsistencies can get rationalized, contradictions get minimized, and that's how the case becomes confession-driven instead of evidence-driven, right?
Wow, that's so dangerous,
isn't it? It's crazy. It's scary because
it's people's lives,
Exactly, and these like memory errors and issues happen a lot with people in general in day-to-day life, right? Our memories are reconstructive. They're not like a video camera. They're not like snapshots, like a picture. Right. Our memories, are reconstructive, meaning they are formed in pieces. We take bits of information that come together, and they're stored as pieces of information. So we have to reconstruct that in order to bring it to mind again, right? And sometimes little pieces of information get pulled in from the wrong place, and so you can create a false memory. Okay, so these false confessions are really not rare anomalies. they're often associated with youth, with cognitive limitations, with long interrogations, suggestive questioning, and high pressure environments. Now, every one of those risk factors was present in this case, right? We talked about that. And that's why the Court of Appeal ultimately ruled the convictions unsafe. Or basically, they said, the convictions were based on these confessions that had way too many variables that were just not good enough conditions to elicit a real confession.
Confession, yeah.
So, the Court of Appeal ruled them unsafe, and it wasn't because the murder wasn't real or because the crime wasn't brutal, but because the mechanism used to prove that guilt just really couldn't be trusted, right?
But and after how long was that? 15 years?
How long ago was this?
No, like the first time, the guy confessed, and then 3 innocent men, including Stephen Miller.
Stephen Miller was the one who confessed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like Stephen Miller was the one who confessed, and the other 2 guys were sent to prison with him.
Exactly. Yep.
But then some years later,
they the lawyers and people kept pushing to get this case appealed because of all the issues, and people saw how corrupt some of these issues were, and it became a really big issue at the time, showing that sometimes the police force can't be trusted because they were doing some pretty shady things at the time. So anyway, so when the justice system relies on more than, I guess, what someone says under pressure than on what physical evidence shows, mistakes are pretty possible, right? They're very possible to happen. And in this case, the physical evidence was quietly waiting. It just couldn't speak yet, right? And that's where we'll come up to the DNA evidence later.
Wait, the time when she was killed, they did not do the DNA test right away.
No, so this was in 1988, right? And the first time, I think, in the UK that anyone used DNA in any sort of trial, it was in 1987. I believe that's true. So it was a very new technology. It was very, it wasn't something that people did, but they nonetheless, at that time, had started collecting samples, including the semen, right, that would later become critical evidence exonerating these people, right, and ultimately leading to a conviction. Okay, so let's talk about the appeal. So the convictions just didn't sit comfortably, and there were lots of concerns on the reliability of Miller's confession in particular, right?
Yeah.
The vulnerability of Miller, right, of that suspect. Inconsistencies between the confession and the crime scene. Some of the things, some of the details just didn't line up. So the things that he said happened couldn't have possibly happened based on what the crime scene showed. And disclosure issues regarding evidence handling, right? So there was some evidence that things might have been mishandled by the police. So in 1992, the Court of Appeal ruled the convictions unsafe and got rid of them, right? The men were released. And
after 4 years in prison.
Yes, after 4 years in prison, which is a long time.
Yeah.
That will ruin your life. Yeah.
I was wondering about the other 2 guys that were sent to prison with Miller too.
Right.
Because the confession came from Miller, but what about the other 2 people? I think police should have different data.
Well, here's the thing, right? There's confirmation bias happening, and they already have this theory that multiple men were involved. They want, people often hear what they want to hear, right? And so they pushed this narrative on Stephen Miller, who was the most likely to give a false confession because he was, cognitively compromised. And he was very suggestible. And so when he said something, right, like I said, that was in line with their theory, they sort of praised him for it and said, okay, tell me more about that, and got more. And then, the other guys denied it completely. because they weren't involved,
because
right?
The information that Miller shared with the police, the other two guys didn't listen to them right away, like directly from him.
Exactly.
So I don't understand how the mismatch in the data was not really seen and taken seriously right away.
I don't know either, but I mean, this is one of the reasons why this case was so big, right? It was a huge issue, and it kind of highlighted that things really needed to be handled better in the court system and how data were handled amongst the police, investigators, etc. So it got a lot of media attention at the time. Okay, so but this means that the murder went unsolved again, right? Because now the three guys are let go. They're exonerated, but now they got to figure out who actually did this, right? And so this is when DNA started coming in pretty strong, right? The biological evidence had been actually preserved, right? So that semen from the scene containing critical DNA was usable, and it was ready to be tested. And now things were coming more into focus with DNA testing and whatnot. So it was pretty clear, though, right away. And one of the first things people did was, okay, well, was it any of the Cardiff three, right? Was it any of these three guys? And clearly was not, right? So that was the biggest evidence, just saying, here's it's not just that you guys mishandled the case. They didn't just get off on some sort of technicality. It's that they weren't the ones that were involved based on the DNA evidence. None of their DNA.
Did they get anything though from the government?
They did.
They spent 4 years of their lives in prison for nothing.
And I was thinking the exact same thing too. So I had to look that up because when I was doing my initial research on this, I didn't see anything about that, and I was like, I have to find out because that's But yeah, they apparently got a few million pounds. That was the three of them. So I don't know how much they got individually exactly. Different reports sort of say different things, but apparently millions. Which is, I mean, they deserve it, right? I mean, that's
and
your whole life is turned around. Their names are dragged through the mud. Like, how are you gonna, especially when you become a felon, right? It is so difficult to get a job afterwards, right? Because you have to put that on all your resumes now.
Well, they should get that.
Yeah,
I'm sure they probably got it, right?
Got what?
Maybe like a letter saying that.
Oh, you mean having something like that? Yeah, that wasn't on, I don't think, no, they wouldn't have to say that on the record for sure, because it's overturned,
well, things
right?
All cleared up.
It's all cleared. The records were expunged, I'm sure. Okay, so the profile was entered into the national database, the DNA evidence, the semen, and in 2002, it came up with a match.
Ooh.
And I know, right? So the match was Jeffrey Gafor. Okay, so Gafor had been arrested for a minor and completely unrelated offense that just so happened to require DNA submission. He had even been briefly interviewed during the original investigation, but that was dismissed. So they didn't really pay much attention to him. So it just goes to show you sometimes when people are so focused on their theory that they have that tunnel vision.
Well, that's what they believe it's true.
And they don't pay attention to anyone else, even though it could be just as equally plausible, if not more, that person was involved. And they sort of just maybe don't do their due diligence. I'm not saying they didn't. I'm just saying that can happen, right? And it does happen. So in 2003, confronted with the DNA evidence, he pled guilty, right? Because, I mean, he was placed at the scene. His DNA was all over the scene. So there was really nothing he could do to get out of it. He stated also that he acted alone. And
wow.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's
had
brutal. No
connection at all to the other men. So he had zero connection to them. And it wasn't multiple people. So, just because it was a violent murder and had tons of stab wounds, that initial assumption was that, oh, it must have been multiple people. No, it was just a very angry dude. So
what was his motive?
So that's the crazy thing, is the motive is really not big at all. It's very like, holy shit, like that really happens. I'll get to that in a second, but I'll tell you about it. Well, actually, why don't we just talk about it right now? So, the reason that it escalated to the point of him stabbing this woman 50 times is all over a dispute of approximately 30 pounds. So 30 British pounds during an encounter with the victim. He was trying to get a prostitute for the night, or a sex worker. I'm using the term prostitute here because that's what they have in the notes. But he was trying to get a sex worker, and that, he was upset that she was trying to charge him an extra $30 or something like that, and it got him that angry that he murdered her. Yeah. So it's so ridiculous that there's no confirmed evidence that he even ever knew her before this time. He was just out there looking for someone. And it was a transactional issue that he got pissed off at. So from that, he did end up getting a life sentence, right? So those guys were released, they got their money, and he got a life sentence. So that was pretty nice.
What about like the family side of the murdered?
Oh, right. Yeah. So that is that's an important question, right? So what, if one of my family members, I would certainly be looking for some sort of compensation, right? Because that's pretty crazy. I think they did go after the police, right? And the police did, go to trial over a lot of this, right? Because, the family and others were really pissed off about this whole situation. So in 2011, 8 former South Wales police officers were charged with conspiracy.
Wow.
Yeah, were charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Now, the allegation was that they manipulated interview records and mishandled evidence. So there was evidence of, of data tampering and messing with the interview records.
Yeah.
So this became one of the largest police scandals in UK history. But unfortunately, the case collapsed due to prosecution disclosure failures. And large volumes of documentation were simply not properly handled or disclosed. And because of that technical issue, the officers were acquitted. They faced no punishment.
Oh.
So that's crazy, right? Like,
I don't see any connection of why they were doing that. If we have the theory, maybe they're doing that because they're trying to save this man who was the true killer, right? Then that would be something. But the man, I think the policemen were not doing it for him. It's just
they just wanted to get they just wanted to close the case, right? There is a lot of pressure on police officers though, and the police stations to close cases though, right? They want, the public is like, why haven't you found them yet?
Right.
And I do feel for them in that sense, where they do have a high pressure job. But it doesn't excuse taking shortcuts, right? I'd rather they get the job done right and get it done properly and make sure you have the right person, because these are people's lives you're dealing with. You can't appease the public. You can't prefer to appease the public rather than just go for the truth, right? I mean, that doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, there were no consequences for them. But the guys that went to prison, though, definitely got some nice compensation out of it at the very
What
least.
about the daughter? Is there any story about the daughter?
Oh, right. What happened to the daughter? Ooh, the daughter of the victim, of Lynette.
Yeah.
I don't know what Lynette's daughter, what happened to her, but she was really young at the time, right? So
Yeah.
I don't even know if she, remembers much, where she was at the time. But I mean, she was, her mom, Lynette, was out by the docks, right? And that's where apparently the perp found her, right? So I think that she probably had someone babysitting her daughter at the time.
Yeah.
At least that's what I'm suspecting, right? But anyway, so the police got away. The people got some compensation that went to prison. But I mean, again, that's it kind of ruins your life. You're gonna be pretty jaded after that, right? Okay, so this case overall just tells you sort of a little bit about how tunnel vision forms, how confessions can override contradictory forensic evidence, and how vulnerable suspects are really at risk, right? Like is the case here.
Interesting.
Yeah, and how, preserved evidence, even though sometimes you think, oh, well, maybe this is not important, right? That's why, they often preserve everything in the form that they can. You try to keep it in its original format as much as possible. And in this case, the semen became critical DNA evidence to correct an injustice that was done earlier, right?
I was actually wondering how they started matching the DNA.
Yeah.
Because in the DNA banks, let's say, there's a lot of data in there, right?
Yeah.
So how did they do that and find the match of?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that the DNA simply matched someone who was already in the system.
Oh, right.
Right, because he had gone in for something minor, like nothing crazy, but it was just like something very minor, and he had to give DNA because at the time DNA was becoming more of a thing. So so that was the case. Yeah. So Tell me the crime. Cardiff 3.
Crime.
I know, right? Hopefully
we also get the psychological points of view from the interrogation.
Yeah, exactly. I tried to add a little bit in there because I was like, well, last time we did the first 2 episodes we had zero research on it because it was just hey, can we put out a couple of episodes to see if people hate us or care to listen.
No, but
at
I
all.
think that's a very interesting discussion on that part, because if we look at the perspectives, maybe the cops think that that's my job and that's how I do the interrogation, right? But the people who got the interrogation, they have different psychological stakes, and I don't know, as you said, some people could handle the pressure very well, but some others
people
don't.
Cannot, exactly.
So just 2 different perspectives from the cop side and I don't know what you call it. Not really the suspects, but
right.
the interrogated people.
Well, they're suspects.
Can I call them suspects?
Yeah, you can call them suspects. They're not. They didn't get convicted of anything, right? But anyway. Yeah, well, that's my story. So next week you're gonna have to come bring your A game.
Okay. We'll find a
Not
story
that I did a
for
great
next
job this
week.
time.
No,
It was
you did
pretty
a great
terrible.
job.
But anyway, so we also decided, right, that we're gonna start releasing things regularly on a specific date. So we're gonna do it on Fridays. So every Friday, tune in for a new episode of Tell Me the Crime.
Tell me the crime.
Tell me the crime. Let's see if that sticks. All right. Thank you, everyone.
See you next week.